One winter night, the wind howled through the pine trees surrounding Sarah Beth's cabin, carrying with it the promise of another long winter night. She pulled her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders and added another log to the fireplace. The flames crackled and danced, casting warm shadows across the small but comfortable room. She had called home for the past 7 years. 7 years of solitude. 7 years since she had left the noise and complications of town life behind, seeking peace in these remote mountains. Her cabin sat at the end of a rarely traveled dirt road, miles from the nearest neighbor. Most folks had forgotten she even existed up here, and that was exactly how Sarah Beth preferred it. She had built this life carefully, deliberately. The cabin was small but well-maintained, with a stone fireplace that kept the rooms warm, shelves lined with books, and windows that looked out onto endless forest. She grew vegetables in the summer, preserved food for winter, and lived simply, off the small inheritance her grandmother had left her. It was a quiet life, a peaceful life, and she had convinced herself it was enough. The knock at her door came just as she was settling down with her evening tea and a worn copy of poetry. The sound was so unexpected that she nearly dropped her cup. No one came to her door, ever. The mail carrier left packages at the end of the long driveway, and the few deliveries she received were scheduled well in advance. Sarah Beth sat perfectly still, wondering if she had imagined the sound. The wind could play tricks, making branches scrape against the cabin walls in ways that sounded almost human. But then it came again, 3 soft, hesitant knocks. She approached the door cautiously, her heart beating faster than it had in months. Through the small window, she could see a figure standing on her porch, hunched against the cold. Snow swirled around him in the yellow glow of her porch light. "Who's there?" she called through the door. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you." The voice was deep, tired, and carried the weight of desperation. "My name is Frank. My truck broke down about a mile back, and I've got my little girl with me. We're not asking for much, just somewhere warm to wait until morning. I can call for help then." Sarah Beth hesitated, her hand on the door handle. She had lived alone for so long, had grown comfortable with her solitude. Letting strangers into her home went against every instinct she had developed. But something in the man's voice, the mention of a child in this bitter cold, made her pause. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" she asked. "Look through your window, ma'am. See for yourself." Sarah Beth moved to her front window and peered out carefully. In the porch light, she could see a tall man in a cowboy hat holding a small bundle against his chest. Even from this distance, she could see his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air, and the way he swayed slightly, as if he had been walking for a long time. The bundle in his arms stirred, and she caught a glimpse of a tiny face surrounded by a knitted cap. A baby, a real baby, out in this weather. Sarah Beth's hands moved to the locks before her mind had fully decided. She opened the door, and the cold air rushed in like a living thing, bringing with it the scent of snow and pine. The man standing on her porch was younger than his voice had suggested. Maybe in his early 30s, with kind eyes and a face weathered by outdoor work. The baby in his arms couldn't have been more than 2 years old, bundled in blankets and wearing a little woolen coat that had seen better days. "Thank you," Frank said simply, his relief evident. "I know this is unusual. I wouldn't have stopped if we weren't desperate." Sarah Beth stepped back to let them in, closing the door quickly against the cold. The warmth of her cabin seemed to embrace the newcomers, and she watched as Frank's shoulders relaxed for the first time since she had seen him. "The baby," Sarah Beth said, her voice softer now. "Is she all right?" Frank looked down at the child in his arms with such tenderness that it made Sarah Beth's chest tighten. "This is Emma," he said. "She's been such a brave little thing, haven't you, sweetheart?" Emma looked up with wide, curious eyes, taking in this new place and the woman who had opened her door to them. She had Frank's dark hair, and the kind of serious expression that babies sometimes wore, as if they understood more than anyone gave them credit for. "She must be hungry," Sarah Beth found herself saying. "And cold. Here, come sit by the fire." As Frank settled into the chair nearest the fireplace, Emma on his lap, Sarah Beth busied herself in the kitchen. She warmed milk in a small pot and found some bread to toast. Her movements felt strange after so many years of preparing food only for herself. "I can't thank you enough for this," Frank said as she handed him the warm milk. "Most people wouldn't open their door to strangers these days. Most people don't live as far from civilization as I do," Sarah Beth replied, settling into her own chair. "What happened to your truck?" Frank explained how the engine had started making terrible sounds about an hour after sunset, how he had managed to coast to the side of the road before it died completely. He had been traveling to his sister's house in Colorado, hoping to give Emma a stable home after her mother, his late wife, had passed 6 months earlier. "I've been trying to figure out how to be both mother and father to her," he said quietly, watching Emma drink her milk. "Some days I feel like I'm failing at both." Sarah Beth found herself studying this man and his daughter. There was something about the way Frank held Emma, the gentle way he spoke to her, that reminded her of something she had forgotten. Her own father had held her like that once, had spoken to her with that same careful tenderness. "You're not failing," she said, surprised by her own certainty. "She looks well cared for, loved." They talked quietly as the fire burned lower. Frank told her about his life as a ranch hand, about how becoming a father had changed everything he thought he knew about himself. Sarah Beth found herself sharing more than she had with another human being in years about her books, her garden, the way the mountains looked in different seasons. Emma fell asleep in her father's arms. Her small hand curled around his finger. The sight stirred something deep in Sarah Beth's chest, a longing she had buried so far down she had almost forgotten it existed. "She's beautiful," Sarah Beth whispered. "She saved my life," Frank said simply. "After Mary died, I didn't know how I was going to go on. But Emma needed me. She gave me a reason to keep trying." As the evening wore on, Sarah Beth prepared the small guest room she had never used. She found clean sheets and extra blankets, even dug out an old wooden cradle she had stored in her attic, a relic from the family that had owned the cabin before her. "You're very kind," Frank said, as she showed him the room. "I hope someday I can repay this kindness." The next morning brought clear skies and the sound of a truck coming up the mountain road. Frank's call for help had worked, and a mechanic had come to tow his truck and give them a ride to town. As they prepared to leave, Emma toddled over to Sarah Beth and held up her arms, wanting to be picked up. Sarah Beth lifted the little girl, feeling the solid warmth of her, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "Thank you," Emma said in her tiny voice, the words careful and clear. Sarah Beth felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart." Frank shook her hand at the door. "If you're ever in Colorado, you'll always have a place with us." After they left, Sarah Beth's cabin felt different. Quieter, but not in the peaceful way she remembered. It felt empty in a way it never had before. She found herself looking at the cradle she had left in the guest room, at the extra place setting she had forgotten to put away. That evening, as she sat by her fire with her tea and her book, Sarah Beth realized something had changed. The solitude she had treasured for 7 years no longer felt like freedom. It felt like hiding. She looked out her window at the snow beginning to fall again. And for the first time in years, she wondered what it would be like to have people to care for, to have her quiet life filled with laughter and conversation and the beautiful chaos of love. The wind still howled through the pines, but somehow, it no longer sounded lonely.